Hi, this is Dave with Market Trading Concepts. It's Sunday, February the 12th, 2012. I just wanted to take a look at some markets, starting off with the Dow Futures. I took a trade on this pullback here on Friday. We're still struggling with this 12,800 level. When we pulled back to this level, we didn't quite touch the 21 period moving average, but when we pulled back to this level in here and I saw that the 5 minutes started making higher lows and it wasn't going any lower, I took a long swing trade position with the expectation that we're going to, kind of work our way a little bit higher towards the, anywhere from 13,000 to 14,000 target on the Dow Futures. So I took a position in the DIA using some Delta 70 options, call options. So we're on the 5 minute chart, close to the end of the day. We powered through and broke through this downtrend line on the 5 minute chart, and this rolled higher. If we waited for that, we may have missed it, but that really was the safer entry point and would have got us in somewhere around the same level as we did get in. So that was one of the trades that we looked at on Friday. We were waiting for either, a push higher, a clean push higher and a pullback to this level or to the rising support, or we were looking for, a failure of this resistance level. We had initially a push through as we expected, stopping out probably some of the shorts. Now that we had this pullback, this is probably a safe entry if it's going to go higher. If we start getting closes below this 21 period moving average, we'll cut the position and reevaluate. So now taking a look at the euro, we had a situation where in our last video last week, we were looking at, the euro testing potentially this level, and it did. It tested the 20 period moving average on the weekly chart. So that came into play. We were expecting that. It just kind of looked like it had to do it. It looked like a magnet, and not sure where it's going to go from here. It pulled up to this level. It tested it and it pulled off, and at this point it's kind of in no man's land and not sure what to do with it except for to wait for some strength, for some closes above here, or for it to roll back over. It's kind of in no decision zone, and there's not really much to do here at this point in time. You have potentially this rolling higher. This is still negative. There's really not much to do here. You kind of have some conflicting signals. If it holds this level, I think, and starts pushing higher, and starts breaking above this level, all indications on the daily chart are going to be long, but we still have some pretty significant resistance on the weekly chart. Looking at the Aussie dollar now, the Aussie dollar is interesting. I took a trade on Friday in the Aussie dollar as well when this scenario took place. It was in a nice strong uptrend here, and we were kind of looking at this trade from last week. We were interested in this Darvas squeeze breakout on the weekly chart, and this looked like it had some room to move higher. If we look at the potential targets, now we do have some resistance overhead, some price resistance here, mainly in this area here at 107.91. So we basically tested that resistance and we pulled back to this breakout level, and that's drilling down to the daily chart. We didn't quite touch the 21 period moving average, but we came down and we held that level. Now here's a warning sign in the MACD on the daily chart, and you've got a red Hakanashi bar. But basically what we did here was we looked at the 5 minute chart, and when the 5 minute chart rolled higher, I'll just flip over to that screen. Okay, so here's a look at the 5 minute chart of the Aussie dollar. So when we had this situation here where it broke this downtrend line, and then the trend started to roll higher, we weren't making any more lower lows. So we started making some higher lows. The trend rolled higher, and then we broke this downtrend line. You can still sell off a little bit from this point here, but as long as you start making series of higher lows, I think it's a pretty decent entry point. If it is going to move higher, it has potentially a lot of room to move higher in terms of its weekly chart. So on its daily chart now, you can see that it didn't quite touch its 20-21 period moving average here, but it did kind of hold this level, and then we took an initial entry off the 5-minute chart, looking for the expectation of a continuation higher above this resistance level into some much higher levels that we pinpointed on the weekly chart. So that's this is more of a swing trade. We're looking at a pretty substantial move where we're probably going to get anywhere from 25 to 50% return on our options, within the next 2 to 8 weeks. So now looking at the Canadian dollar, or the loonie as we like to call it here, and being a Canadian, I can tell you we're all a little bit loony. If you look at the Canadian dollar here, it looks really good for a move higher, potential move higher. You've got this Darvis squeeze on the weekly chart setting up. You have a nice cut pattern within the Darvis box on the weekly. You have resistance at this close to par here. You do have a lot of price resistance overhead, so that's a potential, it could be a potentially bumpy ride, but you've got the squeeze setting up, you've got blue Hakanashis, you have the MACD crossing higher, and if you zoom in here on the weekly chart, you have my trend indicator rolling higher as well. So if you look at this from a cyclical standpoint, where these indicators oscillate up and they oscillate down, just from that perspective alone, you're probably going to get some upside potential here on the oscillator, where you get a couple of weeks of strength at least. So what I'm looking at here is also from a confluence standpoint, you've got this resistance level. It came back off of it, could be forming a bit of a handle, and then I'm looking for a push higher in the Canadian dollar. Now in terms of the daily chart, let me just zoom out here on the daily chart. You had a Darvis squeeze breakout back in this level here. I believe it's 99.26ish. So, and then you had a push higher, but now you have this. You've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, somewhere around 10 days of movement above its 21 period moving average, and then you had a pretty healthy pullback right back down to this level. This is a potential buying area on Friday where we close. This is a potential buying area where I was potentially looking for like let's say the 5-minute chart to roll back to the high side, or the 15-minute, 30-minute, 60-minute, depending on how aggressive the entry might be, but you're looking for it to basically hold this level and push higher. Now the reason that I didn't take this trade was because I basically took the Aussie dollar trade, and in my opinion, they're basically the same trade. It would just be a situation where I'd be doubling up on the trade, because I'm expecting the same kind of movement out of both of them. I think the Australian dollar is going to be a little bit stronger, and that's why I went with the Australian dollar, but it's basically the same play. So there's essentially two entry tactics to this trade from my opinion. In my opinion, you could wait for the break here, which would kind of be like a resumption of this area here, where if you're not comfortable buying the breakout, or the pullback, then it might make sense that you get this situation where in trending markets you get the stair stepping. Well, you could have a situation here, for example, where you've got the stair stepping up, it comes down, and then when it breaks this level in here, you could go long in this area here. So that's a pretty decent strategy to use. It would coincide somewhere with this level as well, and the firing of these signals for the Darvis squeeze on the weekly chart. So that actually on second thought might be a good strategy to look at, and that I may be looking at depending on how the market is acting at that time. As I mentioned, it would kind of be doubling up on the same position or the same type of trade as the Aussie dollar, but it looks like a pretty attractive trade. Aside from the price resistance, it probably has some room to retest some of these levels up here. So it could be a bit of a bumpy ride, but it would be probably an overall pretty decent trade. And I'll be looking at that and reevaluating that in real time as it happens and as the markets unfold. So we already looked at the euro, and looking at the inverse of the euro, the U.S. dollar. So we have a situation here where you've got potential rollover signs here, but the trend is still intact on the U.S. dollar. You have signs of weakness here on the weekly. You have signs of weakness on the daily chart, where this is already rolled over. This is now negative, and you have a situation where you're forming a downtrend, and until it breaks above this 21 period moving average, you're still basically short side bias on the daily chart, but you're holding support on the weekly chart until you get a clean break of this level. This trend line, this key 21 period moving average on the weekly chart. So you're kind of at an inflection point in the US dollar, which would suggest you're at an inflection point in the euro as well. So there's really not much to do there until you start seeing, a clean break either way, to the upside or to the downside. This isn't something that I'd be looking to initiate any type of a position on. And the last thing I wanted to take a look at this week is the British pound. The British pound looks kind of interesting because you have a potential, double bottom pattern forming here on the weekly chart, and you've got a move above its 20 period moving average on the weekly, which is fairly significant. You have the MACD rolling higher, you have blue Hakanashis, you're in a squeeze, which is signaling that you're in a quiet period, but you could enter into a period of volatility or movement again. The trend is still negative, but it's losing momentum to the downside, which means it's showing some upward momentum strength. On the daily chart, you have this break above the 21 period moving average, and you've pulled away from it, and you've got some nice distance between it, and you haven't touched it in quite a while here. So you have bullish indications here on the daily chart. You've got a warning sign here, but this could just be this pullback here. So you have a potential entry level, at least for a decent bounce back up to this level. From the 21 period moving average. So this could be an interesting trade as well. You obviously have resistance here. You have resistance up here on the daily chart where it pulled back. So you could be in a situation here where, for example, you could look at it almost the same way, where you have this level here where you could look to buy this pullback in a sense, or you could look to initiate a position if it breaks above this level. So there's two possible scenarios to look at here. From the weekly chart perspective, it's kind of in no man's land until you get a situation here where you might break above this level, clear this resistance, maybe retest these intermediate highs. So I'll be looking at this weekly chart here to see if we're going to get everything in alignment. Here's the key right here, and this resistance level right here. So there's a lot of movement from this level to this level, but you have a situation here where the daily's starting to look really attractive, and then if the weekly comes into play, it could be a situation where you're going to get a much bigger trade. If I just draw this really sloppy trend line down here, you look like you have a break of this intermediate downtrend line, where you could get just a pull here, a push here, a pullback here, and then start moving higher. So I think that's maybe what's going to happen on the British pound. It looks interesting. I'm going to keep an eye on it. I think the currencies are really setting up for some moves, and they're going to be more. I think the stock indexes have had some nice moves, and they might be a little bit sloppy in the interim, but I think the currencies are now kind of setting up to replace, the boring action in the indexes over the last week or so, and I think they're going to be the instruments of choice to look at for potential trade setting up. So I hope that was interesting. Trying to keep the videos a little bit shorter. We're at about 15 minutes now, still a little bit longer than I'd like, but that's how I'm looking at the markets for the this week closing. And I hope you have a great trading week next week, and I'll try to come back and do a video next weekend. Have a great week.